Vampire the Masquerade Swansong, the much anticipated RPG is finally with us, for another dive into the fantastic world crafted by writer Mark Hagen in many books and other games of various types, the most memorable of which I imagine for most being Bloodlines, released all the way back in 2004. Following on from such a cult classic, as well as after numerous delays in its release, today we take a spoiler-free look at the game, at its triumphs as well as its shortcomings. My name's Mitch Mannix, and this is Vampire the Masquerade Swansong, being magnificently mediocre. Coming into Swansong, I imagine there'll be at least some that will be expecting a contemporary take on the experience that its 2004 cousin Bloodlines provided. But it's worth stating right at the top that Swansong is a pretty far departure from that format when it comes to its gameplay and overall feel. In the game, you'll play as three stylish lurkers of the night, guiding them through various chapters in an almost quintessentially narrative-driven journey to uncover the truth behind a looming threat to the city of Boston's Vampire Collective. During the game's first few chapters, you'll be introduced to the trio of protagonists, as well as some of the game's core mechanics, such as conversational skills, as well as how the vampire population get their fix for blood using the human volunteers called vessels, provided in very luxurious-looking bars and salons.
Shit.
For the sake of the upholstery, I hope you're joking. During those first few missions, it was nice to see such a stylized imagining to the vampire properties. But what was also quite apparent was that the facial animations from time to time didn't exactly hit the mark, with NPCs for no reason frequently looking like someone just tipped fire ants in their underpants, or like even they didn't buy into the lines they were delivering.
Cut her off again and I'll slit your throat.
Was that good? A little later into the game, the player will get access to some of the vampiric powers, such as being able to slow down time briefly, or get a glimpse into a premonition highlighting future or past events. A highlight for me with the abilities came in the unfortunately quite infrequent missions requiring shapeshifting into humans to infiltrate occupied areas, to extract information from adversaries, stealing the likeness of law enforcement to sneak into crime scenes undetected. The game's levels, or scenes as they're referred to in-game, will play out requiring the player to interact with both the environment, picking up objects and solving puzzles, as well as with its inhabitants, winning speech checks through a variety of means, and considering each conversation carefully. One of the big mechanics of gameplay centers around verbal confrontations with NPCs, named exactly that. In confrontations, you'll be pitted against your foe, with dialogue choices dependent on skill points and progress investigating the surroundings, with only a set amount of failures allowed during the discussion before you failed the confrontation, and with it whatever objective you are trying to achieve from it, although featuring more depth usually found in exclusively conversation-based conflicts, spending points to boost chances of success, as well as some integration with the vampire abilities. It did feel jarring as the story developed, with even quote-unquote boss battles playing out this way, simply via dialogue.
I'll break you and your faith.
You're looking at the back-to-back 2003-2004 Boggle Champion. During the game's runtime, the player will visit a fairly light offering of environments, with a fair amount of bland-looking industrial locations, but with standouts such as the previously mentioned crime scene locations, telling stories via the environmental design alone, and the vampire salon with its highly luxurious, red-drenched decor, with small touches all helping to paint the picture of a vampire's hangout. I'm sorry, but it's impossible to take this seriously with a little cheeky nun in the background. Ooh. The beating heart of any narrative-driven RPG experience lies in its main players, and the three playable in Swansong I can't say leave a hugely memorable impression, even despite the extensive lore for each provided in the game's codex as well as unveiled as the story plays out. Caleb, who spends 90% of the game with a face looking like he has a play-by-play repeat of his parents' wedding night playing out in his mind on loop. Probably the most compelling of the three, with some fiery moments.
We've learned to make ourselves scarce.
Scarce? You're hiding out on a fucking barge.
And Leisha, who although has an interesting story to tell due to some odd animations wobbling about like she's had a few too many Bloody Marys, as well as spending most of the game looking and acting completely baffled, doesn't really exhibit enough of a spectrum of emotion to really get the grips with her character.
Who am I?
If that face doesn't say I don't know what does. It's not all bad though, as each of the three does have some standout moments within the game's story depending on how you choose to progress it. And although not exactly played out by the player, the game does deliver some really badass moments within its vampiric escapades.
Don't you move! I swear to God!
You got him? Get in the elevator, Jason.
In 2004's Bloodlines by Troika Games, the IP was used to tell both a dramatic tale, but also one filled with larger-than-life characters. And it seems like developers Big Bad Wolf have decided that Swansong will swing much further towards depicting a much more serious and gritty telling of what a contemporary vampire existence would consist of, and when the game hits those notes well, they do resonate and go at least some way to giving the game an enjoyably dramatic feel, and with it believability.
This guy's the perfect patsy. I almost pity him.
Oh, and to anyone who may have noticed the lack of the original soundtrack in the video, let's just say it's a bit of an acquired taste, with a lot of it not exactly conveying a dark and dramatic vampire theme, to say the least.
I don't wanna be free of you.
Where the wheels start to fall off completely, however, is when the game starts to bleed out some of its more janky attributes. Given that the game was only just released, I'm sure they're yet to iron out a few things to give them some credit. But with my time with the game, I experienced body popping taken to a whole new level, Lacia's scar that would on occasion double up as a hair accessory, as well as either the camera totally bugging out, or the world's most overdeveloped tutorial on where a vampire should bite their victims.
Neck, 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 neck.
There are a few more gems scattered around my playthrough, but since it's a new release can be somewhat expected, and aside from a known bug relating to impeding quest progress in the 8th scene, which I'm sure will be patched out soon, I was actually surprised that there wasn't more crazy surprises, considering the usual quality that we're growing ever more used to with contemporary releases. Although there were a few occasions where the blood-sucking minigame led to a bit of a janky mess, leaving the whole thing looking like the vampire was attempting a death by morning breath, or simply that a force was stopping them from chowing down. Then again, it could simply be that the officer here was epic enough to drop a like and a comment on the video, as who could murder such an absolute legend? With such a heavy focus on conversational progression throughout Swansong, you'd be forgiven for asking what else the game has to offer in its gameplay. Aside from an isolated stealth section, which would be too much of a spoiler to go into detail about, a fair amount of time will be spent figuring out the game's many puzzles, which have quite a wide range in how they will challenge the player. Some will be glaringly obvious, while some will require some significant levels of thinking outside of the box to wrap your head around, and when done well works really great for breaking up long sections filled with purely conversational gameplay. Figuring out puzzles, quizzing the world's inhabitants, and luring off NPCs to snack on them does end up with the game feeling like an odd blend of LA Noire mixed with Hitman, just with any of the more action-orientated elements removed.
In my place, under the current circumstances, I can't really go poking my nose in her business.
I feel like there's evidence that poking your nose in has already had consequences. Now I know that purely narrative-driven experiences don't exactly have to be action-packed, but with Swansong, both the story itself as well as its characters made the lack of any player-controlled action outside of walking around feel a little like I was unwillingly attempting some sort of pacifist run through what would usually be a game with at least some more interactive and engaging experiences. As I said, I've seen games of this type work very well, accounting for the lack of any combat or advanced movement mechanics. But with Swansong, even the narrative points you in directions where it does more to highlight the lack of these elements rather than compensate for them. Being such a powerful being hunting down those that have done you wrong just feels odd when the outcome is nothing but giving them a good talking to, and maybe watching a cutscene with all the fun stuff. Playing through the game, your chances of winning a verbal confrontation are frequently tied to if you have enough points allocated into a particular skill in the game's somewhat tautologous options, such as psychology, persuasion, and rhetoric, with skills like security and technology to crack into computers and locks to uncover additional items in your investigations. Talents work to increase the chances of winning speech checks and granting extra blood and willpower, which is used when activating abilities, and traits that will reduce the cost of spending skill points in a certain discipline, which if I'm honest all feels a bit unimaginative and underdeveloped. A major issue for me with this is that there's no way of knowing what you'll be asked during each encounter, as you would expect, so it could lead to instances where the player has no choice but to fail speech checks and sometimes objectives with it just due to the RNG of the stats required, which can frequently feel like a bit of a cop-out when other investigatory-centered titles like LA Noire or Until Dawn leave more room for the player getting somewhat ahead using their own intuition. What this style does leave room for, however, is the huge amount of replayability. And given the amount of skill points provided to the player even when fully clearing a scene, and the punishing results of making the wrong decisions, I'm sure this was a heavy focus when developing the game. There is even a results screen on finishing a chapter that will list out all the missed opportunities and outstanding plot points following completion of a chapter, so those that are so inclined can repeat them to uncover all the lore and alternative plot threads available.
You're afraid of them. The British, I mean. Why?
I know what they're capable of.
I have no idea what you mean.
The vampire abilities are another area where I feel the game could have done a little more, given the IP it's showcasing. I think I used the slow time once for a puzzle throughout my whole playthrough, and the one around seeing apparitions a couple of times for extra clues. And as for the super speed blink ability, it was used a handful of times as a jazzy way of travelling to the story's main objectives. Overall, I feel that those looking for a vampiric, character-heavy RPG along the lines of 2004's Bloodlines will ultimately feel let down by Swansong due to its focus on more condensed linear RPG storytelling. But even as a more narrative and character-driven experience, as the developers opted for, it didn't really feel like a memorable experience for me. The story isn't exactly what I'd call the most gripping, and the characters, although having their moments, felt somewhat lifeless.
Oh, you see what he did there?
It was cool for a while to get a look into the imagining of vampire life in the modern age, not littered with cliché or over-the-top set pieces, but I feel Swansong went a bit too far in the other way, leading to an experience where it felt like I was waiting for the game to really get going, but was left feeling like it never really did. Games such as Until Dawn also have a large leaning towards exploration and heavily weighted decision making, but also provides quality where it counts to carry the player through its experiences. If you are madly in love with the lore around the franchise, then maybe take a look at the game for a chance to dive into more. And if you're a fan of games such as LA Noire and Until Dawn, then this may also be worth a look. But if you're those wanting a bit more bite in your vampire RPGs, you may have to go hungry a little while longer yet. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for so much more. And I'll see you guys in the next video.